India's developmental needs India to have peace on its neighborhood as well as its extended neighborhood. And whether we like it or not, China is on our neighborhood, and we have an uneasy relationship with our northern neighbor.
You're watching the Gist on Strat News Global. I'm Ramananda Sengupta. Our very, very special guest today is Mr. Nandan Unnikrishnan, Distinguished Fellow, Observer Research Foundation, and one of the keenest observers of Russia. And we are speaking even as President Vladimir Putin and Prime Minister Narendra Modi are in the midst of the 23rd India-Russia Summit. Thank you so much for joining us, Nandan. I know you have a very,
Thank
very
you
hectic
for
day.
inviting me.
Right. So let's kick it off right from the beginning. People will talk about outcomes and all kinds of things, but all that comes later. What is the prime messaging that you see from this meeting?
One is, there are two messages. One is India is showing that it is unlikely to allow third parties to decide what kind of relations it should have and with whom. So it will persist with its relationship with Russia, despite pressures from the US and the West to try and curtail that relationship. There is also a messaging that Putin is giving to his domestic audience, particularly, and to the international community, that Russia is not isolated, that despite the best efforts of the West in the past 4 years, Russia has friends across the globe, and Russia is capable of defending its interests and maintaining these relationships. So there's multiple messaging. And of course, it's hugely symbolic that this is the first visit by President Putin to India after the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, that's interesting that you mentioned, that we're trying to show the world that we're not going to be influenced. But, keeping on that topic, what are your views on this sort of diplomatic battle being fought through the Indian print media, where you had the British, French, and German ambassadors accusing Russia of escalating the war, even while the peace talks were underway?
Well, I think, it was in very poor taste. But let's also remember, this is not the first time they've done it. They did it last year also.
Right.
The EU ambassadors wrote an op-ed together. I can't recall exactly, but I think last time it was published in the Indian Express. So, this is not the first time. And we did not seem to react too sharply last time. So maybe they got encouraged. But this time, I think they misplayed their hand for the simple reason that the Russian ambassador was allowed to print his rejoinder. And that turned out to be harsher than what they had written. So I don't think they will now attempt to go down that road again.
That's a good thing to hear. But every time we discuss Russia, one of the few things that come up is the trade aspect, which is international north-south transport corridor, Chennai Vladivostok sea link, and now we're talking about opening up the Arctic sea route. But where are we on those? They've been going on for a long, long, long time, and nothing much seems to be moving really from what I've heard.
The problem is, I think, starts at a different point. All these connectivity routes will fructify the moment there is commercially viable volume on them. Right now, we don't have commercially viable volume on any of these three routes. So therefore, there are these delays. There is no pressure. There is no pressure on anyone, on any government or private sector undertaking to complete the route. So you have gaps where, you have to keep taking something off a ship, put it on a train, then put it on a truck, put it on a train again. That kind of stuff keeps going on. Whereas it's supposed to be multimodal, but it's supposed to be smooth in the sense that it arrives at, let's say, Bandar Abbas by ship. From there, it goes on to a truck or a train and goes right up to the Caspian and then crosses the Caspian. So,
Right.
Unless there is substantial increase in volume, we are going to face this problem. And to meet that volume, I think there has to be an effort to try and get Southeast Asian nations as well as other countries in South Asia to use this corridor to get their goods to Europe, to Turkey, to other places. So if we can inject greater amount of volume onto this route through that method, then I'm sure the infrastructure will catch up very soon.
Another thing that one of the lesser known aspects of the relationship is this something called the Reciprocal Logistics Support Agreement, or RELOS, which I believe was signed in February earlier this year. What is that all about?
Well, this is very similar to what we have already signed with the Americans and a few others. Is basically we allow each other's militaries to use facilities in on our territory for
Hmm.
repairs, rest and recreation, that kind of thing. And of course, we will apply our judgment if we feel that any of these platforms are being used for military purposes specifically. Then we will make a judgment on whether we should allow them to come into our ports or use any of the facilities. The same, I'm sure, applies to the Russians too. So there's nothing
Hmm.
unusual in the agreement. But
Hmm.
what is probably unusual is that we have made what was de facto, we've added a kind of a legal foundation to it. India,
Uh-huh.
Russia, we've had a military relationship for several decades, but
Right.
it is not unlike, let's say, our relationship with the United States. There are no framework agreements between India and Russia. So I guess the
Hmm.
Russians have felt that if we are going to sign with Americans, we might as well have something as a legal basis even between India and Russia too.
Well, okay, it's as basic as that, But one of the things that struck me about it is, I mean, from what I've heard, is that it also allows for the sort of settlement of 3,000 troops per country in each other's countries. What could that be all about?
Well, no, when this is an outer limit, but the point
Hmm.
is that when you go for exercises, when you go, when a ship, uh, suppose an aircraft carrier has more than 1,000 people on board, right?
Right.
So therefore, you are just making a provision to allow X number of personnel from that country or this country to be physically on the territory of the other country, and also making sure that they are treated as foreign troops, and therefore the laws of our country will apply to them. I mean, if Indians are visiting, let's say, Russian bases, then it'll be our laws that will apply to the Indian troops. So these are all
Oh,
legal
okay.
requirements.
Okay, so it's
We're
it's
just
not a
trying to.
question of our sort of permanently stationing a certain number of troops in their
No, no,
country and
no.
they in ours.
Absolutely not.
I mean,
I don't think India will ever allow any foreign troops to be stationed on its territory. So
uh-huh.
the question does not arise. So even if the
Hmm.
Russians wanted or were willing to allow Indian troops on their territory, the fact that we do not want it will make sure that this does not happen.
Hmm. Every time we discuss Russia, particularly of late, China crops up into the discussion. And there is now a lot of discussion about trying to revive the RIC, the Russia, India, China talk. What are your views on that?
Well, there is an equal number of people who say that every time we discuss India Russia, the US keeps cropping up.
That's true.
So
Yes.
so you can't help it. I mean, in this geopolitical turn that is taking place in the world, every great power somehow impacts its relationship with other great powers. So
Hmm.
all relationships are kind of in the mix together, and they do rub off on each other. Some influence more, some influence less. So it is not surprising that US and China come up as topics when we are discussing India Russia. That is point number
Hmm.
one. Point number two, uh, look, we are at a stage where India's developmental needs India to have peace on its neighborhood, as well as its extended neighborhood.
Hmm.
And whether we like it or not, China is on our neighborhood, and we have an uneasy relationship with our northern neighbor. So it is but good foreign policy to try and de escalate your relationship with your northern neighbor and try and find uh, foundations on which you can build a stable relationship. You don't need to be friends. I mean, I'm not suggesting that overnight we become friends with China. But the point is, I think India would benefit greatly if there was an element of predictability in our relationship with China. Because at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, India's primary challenge today is not external, it's internal. It's our internal development. We need to build our strength. And so, therefore,
Right.
we need to focus on that.
Okay. So what you're saying is that 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 even if we don't have sort of an RIC in place, we still need to build up a relationship with the Chinese at some levels so that they're not so unpredictable as they are now. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I'd like to just add one thing. I mean, you'd raised the question of RIC. So
Mm-hmm.
RIC, from a Russian perspective, originally was thought as this foundational grouping, which then subsequently evolved to BRICS and all that stuff. But I also understand that. I mean, I would tend to agree with the view that if we are to work out a stable security architecture in Asia, it would
Mm-hmm.
require Russia, China, and India to be on the same page. There
Mm-hmm.
will be no stable security architecture in Asia possible unless these three nations have some kind of agreement amongst themselves on some basic minimum issues. So,
Okay.
therefore, I mean, they come to a common denominator, as it were, even if it is the least. So, therefore, from that perspective, RIC is important. But has RIC reached that stage to discuss these issues? Not at all. It will take a long time more. Right now, RIC is a kind of sort of a lame duck in the sense that you have one country like Russia, which has a very good relationship with China and separately a very good bilateral relationship with India. But the other
Mm-hmm.
two do not necessarily have a good relationship or a stable relationship with each other. So, therefore,
Mm-hmm.
RIC is under a certain amount of pressure.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you say that, because yesterday there was this lady from Russia called, I think, Dr. Kulik, who sort of, started her remarks.
Lydia Kulik.
That's right. Who started her remarks by saying that, the four countries, and she actually described them as the quadrilateral for some reason, that is the US, Russia, China, and India, saying that the way these countries interact with each other will determine how the world shapes up over the future. And she said among these countries, the strongest trust is between India and Russia. Is that something you would agree with?
Well, I think she's being extra kind to India. We are definitely not at the same level as United States, China, and Russia. We are
Mm-hmm.
probably a notch lower, whether you take your economic component or your military component or comprehensive national power. The three others are a rung above us. But the fact is that is true. What I would agree with is that over a period of decades, and we are talking of Soviet Union's relationship with India and subsequently grew into Russia's relationship with India, I think
Mm-hmm.
in level at the level of trust, it's an entirely unique relationship. I don't think I can think of any other relationship where a country like the Soviet Union would agree to lease a nuclear submarine to a completely alien country like India, which was not socialist, not communist, was a free market economy, even if it was a planned economy, but nevertheless, so it would require a huge amount of trust. Even today, despite AUKUS, Australia is waiting for those nuclear submarines, and they have ostensibly much more synergy in the strategic sphere, but it has not happened. So trust between India and Russia is unique.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Kulik also mentioned that there is a lot of demand, particularly now in Russia, given their demographics, for Indian labor. But she said that it would mostly be labor, as in labor, the people who sort of work in construction and those kind of labor rather than, you know, people who work in IT and other places because of their own internal systems. How would you send more Indian labor to Russia, and how do you ensure that they don't join the war there?
No, there are three elements here. One is um I don't think I agree that Russia is in need of migrant labor, particularly
Mm-hmm.
now that they are trying to reduce the number of number of people who are coming from Central Asia. So
Mm-hmm.
India is obviously appears to be an obvious answer to some of the problems. Uh, I also agree with her that at this stage it appears that the majority of labor that will go there will be uh, construction labor and all. But you have to understand something else.
Mm-hmm.
What we consider construction labor is not what will actually end up working in Russia. Because in Russia, uh, nobody carries bricks on their head. You know, that
Mm-hmm.
that is not possible. There are safety
Right.
regulations. There are very clear cut rules on how a construction site has to work, and
Mm-hmm.
it's highly mechanized. It's not as manual labor as labor intensive as in India. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, by Indian standards, when these people go to work there, they would be at least semi skilled, if not skilled in a particular uh, area. The second thing is a large number of Indian workers are going to work at textile factories in Russia. So these
Mm-hmm.
are also skilled workers. You know, they are
Right.
not unskilled labor in that sense. Within the
Mm-hmm.
Russian hierarchy, if you want, social stratification, you may consider
Mm-hmm.
these to be the lower end of society, you know, in terms of stratification, because these are construction labor, textile factory workers, and all. But if you look at it from the Indian context, these are definitely not what we would call unskilled labor.
Mm-hmm. But
So,
there
but
is
yes,
also
when you
this.
talk about, sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, no, go ahead.
Uh,
Hmm.
but yes, IT sector and all that, which we normally export to the United States and all, Russia does not need cheap labor in that sector. Russia's
Mm-hmm.
IT sector is, um, in some ways, several years ahead of ours. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
they 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 have a very strong scientifically educated pool of people who work as programmers, high-end programmers, and they may need uh, certain element of Indian programming skills. You know, the ones that would really be typing in a lot of data or typing in certain programs, but it will be the lower end, and there would not be too many of that. But there will be
Mm-hmm.
some people, for example, management skills, management
Mm-hmm.
of banking, management of hotels, uh, the service sector. You will see that a few of Indian managers will start traveling to Russia. That too will happen.
So, again, coming back to Dr. Kulik's talk yesterday, she again, perhaps again, like you said, she was being kind. She said that the Indian students who go there to study don't necessarily get guaranteed jobs, particularly high-end jobs, simply because they cannot afford them. Is that a correct assessment to make? In the
Well,
sense that
one
a
is
IT person would get a lot more, let's say, in America than he might get in Moscow. Is that a possible?
absolutely, that is absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm.
The After all, Russia is a middle income country. They
Mm-hmm.
have a per capita of 11 or $12,000.
Mm-hmm.
The United States is a much higher per capita country, and therefore the remuneration will be significantly higher. But the second part is that, see, Russia is unique in the sense that you can get away in America with knowledge of English. In
Mm-hmm.
Russia, knowledge of English is an asset, but knowledge of Russian is essential.
Right.
And a working knowledge of Russian, even after 4 or 5 years of studying in Russia, is not necessarily something that everyone is acquires as a skill. It's one thing to
Mm-hmm.
listen to lectures and to be able to transcribe what the lecturer is giving you. It's quite another to be able to conduct a full-fledged professional conversation in a foreign language. You see, so
Of
that is
course.
a much higher level. So therefore, uh, employment opportunities within Russia at the higher end are
Mm-hmm.
more and more difficult, are more difficult for Indians particularly. But you would be surprised at the number of Indians I find, students who have moved on and found jobs or started small scale businesses and are doing very, very well. So, I the Indians are very enterprising people. So I
Mm-hmm.
think, given the opportunity, they would not uh, miss an opportunity to try and create a good future for themselves.
Mm-hmm. So, as I promised, I won't take too long. I'll let me just close this interview with one last question that, while it would be silly to ask you what you think the actual outcomes will be in specific terms, but is there something that we should be looking forward to post this particular summit, which we weren't really expecting? Or is it just the optics that plays?
No, I personally think that um this summit is very important because I don't expect any bombastic announcements, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it is important to the extent that uh, the two leaders are going to exchange views on the global situation. They're going to exchange views on the bilateral relationship. They're going to address gaps which are self evident, particularly in trade and import export balances. So this is a conversation that has to be had. So you can come to bombastic announcements about, we'll buy S-400, we'll buy Su-57 and all that. That can come later, but you have to first
Mm-hmm.
settle the basics. And I think
Right.
that is why this visit is so important, because Mr. Modi and Mr. Putin are going to settle the basics and give political direction, so that then their uh, juniors or their assistants can carry this relationship forward.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very very clear perspective of what the relationship is all about. And with that, let me close this interview. Thank you so very much for taking time out
Thank
on
you.
such a hectic day,
Thank
and
you.
I
Thank
look
you for
forward to having
inviting
you
me.
again. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
and I will invite you again, and I'll obviously we will see how far your sort of pretty positive analysis goes in terms of this relationship.
Thank you.
Right?
Thank you.
That, that was Dr. Nandan Unnikrishnan, Distinguished Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation and one of the keenest analysts of Russia that you can find, talking to us about President Putin's visit to India and where we are and what we can expect. I do hope you enjoyed this particular edition of The Gist, and I look forward to seeing you again. Till then, this is Ramananda Sengupta.